Hi there, I'm Scott. Welcome back to my channel, CineRam. This is the final episode of my series, MCU, Motion Conflict Underoos, where I talk a little bit about each of the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies, at least in part. Sorry, it's been sort of a wacky series for me. I haven't really been on a real schedule. It's been some time since my last episode was posted. Because I have been sick and I've been very busy, and it's been hard to find the opportunity to shoot a video, but I wanted to talk about the movie Infinity War and the movie Endgame, which I've managed to see twice now, so I feel like I'm prepared to talk about what I think of both of them. I never really properly reviewed Infinity War, but I'd like to talk about that now. I'm not going to get into spoilers yet, but I will. So, if you just want to know what I think about both these movies generally, please feel free to keep watching, but then I'll get into spoilers, and if you want to avoid them because you haven't seen either of these movies, particularly Avengers Endgame, that would be the good time to click off onto something else. Avengers Infinity War, the movie Infinity War, is not actually an adaptation of this series called Infinity War. It's an adaptation of Infinity Gauntlet. And it was funny when sometime during the shooting, Zoe Saldana was being interviewed about the films. And she said, we're going to be shooting Infinity War and then taking a break before we go back to shoot Infinity Gauntlet. But that's not actually, of course, the title of the movie. They called it Endgame. But, of course, Infinity Gauntlet is the graphic novel, the comic book story, the series, about Thanos acquiring the Infinity Stones, clicking his fingers, wiping out half the universe, and then the heroes basically going after him, going to find him, and get the power away from him so they can restore the universe back to the way it was. Now, when I first read about Thanos and about the Infinity Stones, about the fact that he wiped out half the universe, I was kind of like, oh, that's the other half of the universe, right? If you took the whole universe and divided it in half, then our half would be the one that actually gets to live and the other half dies, right? The people on Earth, the characters, everything like that, we get to live. No, that's not actually how it worked. He eliminated a portion of the heroes of the story. They just sort of vanished. So then the remaining heroes then basically went after him in the universe, and they found him and fought him, and then that whole conflict was resolved. The actual storyline for Infinity War, as opposed to Infinity Gauntlet, is about something very different. It's about a character called the Magus, who is basically the dark side version of a character named Adam Warlock, who at one point is one of the heroes. And Adam Warlock is most likely going to be introduced into the cinematic universe during the next few movies, probably most likely during Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, which is something that's going to be made in the next few years, I believe. But yeah, it isn't the same as Infinity Gauntlet, the story. So that's why it's so very different from Infinity War and Avengers Endgame, the film, because Adam Warlock is not a character yet, so he has nothing to do with any of this. This right here is the Magus, the evil side, basically, the evil side of Adam Warlock. And so he's basically the one after the Infinity Stones and the Infinity Gauntlet, so he can have all the power and be, basically just wants to do whatever he wants, and have the infinite power to do so, and so that's why he wants the Gauntlet and the Stones, so that he can do all that, and it's up to pretty much all these other characters and more to stop him. So that's Infinity War, the book. And the reason why I have this here is because I wanted to show you a little something later on, a passage in particular, a particular page. So anyway, Infinity War, the movie, of course, came out last year, and what limited information we had about it, of course, it was about Thanos. No, he's not actually on the cover here, yeah. Thanos, of course, is played by Josh Brolin. He is the, what they call the Mad Titan. He has been looking for the Infinity Stones because he is convinced that the worlds of the universe are overpopulated and they will suffer because of lack of resources. So he figures the Infinity Stones and the Gauntlet is the best way to solve the problem. He's simply going to make half of all living creatures in the universe vanish into thin air or thin space, however you want to put it, so that the ones that remain will be able to live more comfortable, more fulfilling lives because they'll have a lot more resources at their disposal. So that's his objective. The Infinity Stones were released, most of them were introduced one at a time throughout the films themselves, and they were used for different things, different missions. Some bad guys wanted them to do bad things, some good guys wanted to keep them, protect them, use them, what have you. One of the really inventive ones, of course, is the Time Stone that Doctor Strange was using in his film, and of course that was a big problem, a big contention in the Infinity War, when a lot of the heroes get together to try and keep the Time Stone away from Thanos. Infinity War, the film, is one of the best ones in the series, in my opinion. It's a lot of the great mainstream blockbusters have the right balance of seriousness and action, suspense, humor, and also just sort of sorrow over things lost. And Infinity War had that right balance, and it had a little bit more sadness than a lot of people, I think, were expecting. I'm just trying to think back as to what it was I expected from this movie, and I think that at the time I was predicting that Thanos would basically come to Earth and acquire all the Infinity Stones except for one, because the Reality Stone was in another world called Nowhere, which is seen in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1. A couple of Asgardians took the Reality Stone at the end of the second Thor movie and took it to the Benicio del Toro character for safekeeping. So it was there that the stone could be found. So I figured, okay, he's going to go to the place where the Power Stone is, get that. He's going to get the Space Stone from the Asgardians, and then he's going to go to Earth to get 3 of the stones, right? Soul Stone's probably in Wakanda, right? And the other 2 stones, you've got Doctor Strange with the Time Stone, you've got Vision with the Mind Stone. So if he gets all those, then in the second movie, which I didn't know what it would be called at the time, would be about Thanos running off to get the last stone, and the heroes chasing him and trying to stop him before he gets it. But of course, I was wrong about that. I didn't know, of course, where the Soul Stone was, so I didn't have any information on that. And as it turns out, the Reality Stone, which is being kept on Nowhere, was one that was dealt with early on in the movie. But I found a lot of it really exciting. I found maybe some of the music a little bit much during the really tragic moments. There's a couple of characters that get killed before the end of the movie, and the music really tries to goose that emotion quite a bit, a little bit too much. But overall, I really liked it a lot, and all the big set pieces were really amazing. Some brutal fights in the movie, some pretty brutal fights. One of the first big ones is between Tony Stark, Doctor Strange, Spider-Man, and some of Thanos' minions. And that one's a pretty brutal fight. And also the fight between Wanda, Vision, and some more minions in Scotland. I believe they're hanging out in Scotland. That's a pretty brutal fight as well. One thing that I thought was kind of a drawback in the movie was the lack of Steve Rogers and Natasha Romanoff in the movie. Ever since they had their own little adventure in The Winter Soldier, I really liked the interactions between the two of them, and I always liked seeing more of them together. And they get introduced in the movie they're not in the movie as much nearly as a lot of the other characters. And I thought it was sort of an unintentionally humorous moment when Wanda, who has incredible power, and Vision, who's also very powerful and has the Mind Stone that shoots beams and everything like that, are fighting the bad guys, and the bad guys sort of get the upper hand on them. They do some serious damage. But then Steve Rogers and Sam Wilson with his falcon wings and Natasha all show up. And it's just like, uh-oh, look out, bad guys, here come the regular humans, which is kind of silly because they have no superpowers. They're good fighters and everything, but they don't have the superpowers that these other guys have. So the fact that they jump in and save the day at the end without their superpowers seemed kind of, like I said, unintentionally funny at the time. But aside from that, pretty strong movie overall. Really found it exciting. The whole splitting of the storylines worked really well. There was a lot of cross-cutting between them that I thought worked really well. The only other complaint that I have about the movie is the fact that there's a lot of special powers and magic involved in these things, but the nanotechnology involved in Spider-Man and Iron Man's and Black Panther's suits, and particularly their helmets, always seemed a little bit much for me. The fact that these things, micro-robotics, could build the suits and build the helmets around them in like an instant just seemed like a little bit too much to swallow. Yeah, not the biggest fan of that. I mean, what do? They crawl through Peter Parker's hair to build the mask around his head. I just, that's really weird. I never really bought into that. But it does, allow for some of the main actors to play scenes, dialogue scenes, without having to take things off, without having a mask open up like this, for them to wear this funny-looking helmet while they talk. That seemed like important in Civil War. When there are these big emotional scenes, these serious emotional moments, it would be better to have Downey have his whole head uncovered rather than have just the front part of his mask open up. So I understand why they did it. It just seems kind of silly. The technology seems just a little bit too fantastical for ordinary Earth technology. Some of it is vibranium-powered, but not all of it. It's just like Tony being a genius and everything. So anyway, Infinity War, really good movie, really terrific movie. Saw it twice in the theater and have rewatched it, at least the set pieces many more times beyond that. In Endgame, I liked but didn't like as much. I'm a big fan of time travel movies, but not when they're so inconsistent and break their own rules and what have you. There's other things that I didn't really care for in Endgame. Overall, I found a lot of it to be really fun and exciting. And again, like Infinity War, it has the right balance of suspense and action, humor, but also the serious, kind of sorrowful parts, especially during the opening stretch of the movie when they're dealing with the fallout from Infinity War. All that stuff worked really well together. It's a nice balance. And just overall, a really well-made picture, just as far as tone and as far as being as having sort of a satisfactory storyline for the characters themselves. So that worked really well. The plot works less well because when you have time travel, you introduce the possibility of a lot of paradoxes. And I know they argued about how time travel works and how it actually doesn't work, I disagree with some of that, and thusly the contradictions, the paradoxes that are introduced into the storyline as a result of what the heroes of the movie do seem to kind of negate their actions in a lot of ways. But that's me being finicky about time travel mechanics in fiction, especially in movies, that I'm a big fan of. For a lot of people, it's not going to make a difference. A lot of people aren't going to be worried about the mechanics of time travel. I've been worrying about this stuff ever since Back to the Future came out when I was 12 years old. Wait, how is this possible? If they went back and did this, would it change this and would affect this, blah, 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 and I spent a lot of time thinking about that. And so I would spend a lot of time thinking about this after I saw Endgame on both the occasions, and would it really work that way? How would this affect the timeline in the future and everything like that if they went back and changed this but tried to change something back and what have you? So it didn't entirely work for me. A lot of it does. Most of it does, actually. But there were a few things about it that, I question the logic of, just because of how my mind works as far as time travel stories go. So that's it. Like both movies, Infinity War I like more than Endgame, but I still like Endgame. I have reservations about the plot, but overall, they're both very satisfying films with a lot of really great moments in it. And one particular moment in Endgame beats practically everything else in the whole MCU as far as I'm concerned, but I'll get into that in the spoilers. So maybe I'll get into that now. Shall we talk about spoilers then? Everybody seen Endgame? Yeah? You've seen Infinity War? You're familiar with it? You're familiar with the plot? Can we get into that now? That'd be good. So let me show you something in this book right here. So this is basically a collection of comic books from the Infinity War storyline. And here's the Magus, and at this point in the story, he's actually managed to get his hands on the Infinity Stones and the Gauntlet, and has just put it on, and is now functioning, and now he has the power of the Infinity Gauntlet. So as he puts the Gauntlet on and feels the power coursing through him, basically it says, within the confines of what is, a new supreme being steps forth, and a champion far from home learns that the word ultimate carries little weight in this current contest of titans. So here he is, basically, he's acquired all this power, and he's basically negated the power of all the other characters because he's just so powerful because of all these elemental stones that he now has. With a thought, I turn the universe's most devastating weapon upon its bearer. My every whim is a mere urge away from reality. So this is how it feels to be omnipotent. Interesting. But it will take a bit of getting used to. Time. He feels the power of each one of these stones that he has in his possession individually. Time. Every moment that ever was or ever will be cascades over me. Space. I am wherever and everything. I am wherever and everything. That's poorly phrased. The Mind Stone, the thoughts of all the beings mixed within my own. Every single being in the whole universe, right? Wow. The Soul, endless spirits wait for me to sculpt the clay of their essence. Reality, too much for me to focus on just yet. Power, so much of it everywhere and all me. Now, so this is what Thanos was experiencing when he put the last stone in the Infinity Gauntlet, when he ripped it out of Vision's head and put it in the gauntlet. You know, he experienced the power of each of them individually when he puts them in the gauntlet. But when he gets all of them together and experiences all of it at once, whoa, baby, right? And so when that happens, then he's able to basically, any thought, any whim that he has becomes reality. Now, we make a big thing about him snapping his fingers, and, you know, it's probably very likely that he didn't need to do that. He just thinks it, and it's possible, much the same way that Tony Stark is able to trigger all sorts of functions in his Iron Man suit just by thinking of it. It's not like he has to press a button to fire a rocket or to fire his thing. You know, it's all triggered by his thoughts, basically, because he has a specially designed helmet that does that. At least I think that's how it works anyway. In Endgame, of course, we have the heroes basically trying to undo what Thanos did at the end of Infinity War and bring back not only their friends, but also the, you know, trillions of other life forms that have been wiped out because of Thanos' actions, because he was able to snap his fingers and do that. And like he wasn't able, it didn't necessarily mean he needed to actually have to snap his fingers, but it's sort of a focused moment. Where he's like concentrating on what it is that he wants and bringing that about using the power of all 6 stones at once. So in Endgame, when they get the stones and they fashion their own gauntlet, as it were, out of Iron Man materials, and 2 characters in the movie have the opportunity to use it at that point. First, of course, is Hulk. Hulk manages to snap his fingers, but of course he's got to withstand the power of the stones themselves. And it was tough for Thanos. It's even tougher for Hulk, because as it turns out, Thanos is even tougher for Hulk. To snap his fingers and bring everybody back means an incredible amount of energy to be withstood, and the concentration required to just say, okay, everyone who disappeared before, they're coming back to now, not 5 years earlier, but now. And to kind of focus in on that and bring that about, it's got to be tough. Got to be really tough. But it's an interesting challenge. It's an interesting thing to think about. Obviously, there's a lot of fantastical elements to these stories that are sort of beyond the scope of any normal person. But, you know, that's why they're superhero movies, you know? They're not normal. They're extraordinary. The best stories, most exciting stories are either about extraordinary people or ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances. And that's, you know, the Avengers movies definitely fall into the former category. So, Infinity War, Thanos manages to get all the stones, wipe out half the people in the universe, including half of the main characters of the film, because there's a huge cast in Infinity War, and you have a greatly reduced cast for the most part in Endgame. But those characters that are left, they rely on each other, you know, and they team up basically to form the squad that's going to run back to some of the previous films, the events of the previous films, so they can snatch up the stones before Thanos even gets the chance to get them in the first place. But their plan hinges, of course, on them keeping the timeline intact. After all, if Thanos isn't able to actually get the stones and snap everybody out of existence, then there's no point to the heroes going on the mission in the first place. They need to make sure that the stones go back to wherever it was they were originally, so that Thanos can pick them up one by one, as he did in Infinity War, snap his fingers, because if he doesn't, then that creates an incredible paradox. And that's their plan. You know, which is a good plan, if they can pull it off, which they don't. First of all, they manage to get all the stones, but they, you know, lose a couple of people in the bargain. They lose Nebula, and they lose Gamora. Sorry. And Natasha, of course, they lose Natasha. It seemed a little strange that before they went on the mission, when they go on the mission, nobody asks too many details, it seems, about the Soul Stone. Tony and Nebula have got to know about what happened with Gamora. You know, they don't necessarily know that Gamora was exchanged for the Soul Stone by Thanos. But they gotta know that something happened to her, and they don't share this detail with the rest of the team. And so when the team splits up to go on their separate missions, and you've got two people going to get the Soul Stone, as it turns out, those two people are Natasha and Clint, which is kind of a lucky coincidence, because one of them needs to sacrifice the other because they have such a close personal relationship for so many years in order to get the Soul Stone. Nobody thought to warn them about that, how that might happen, but it was just kind of lucky that the two of them managed to go, because if you had two characters going to get the Soul Stone and neither of them really cared that much about each other, then that really wouldn't work so well. But it raises some questions about putting the stones back where they found them. First of all, if you put the Soul Stone back where it was, do you get the person that was sacrificed back? Probably not. But how do you actually do that? We don't find out. If Steve goes back to return the Mind Stone and the Soul Stone to where they were, the Mind Stone was contained within the scepter that Loki used in Avengers Part 1. And the Space Stone was contained within the cube, the Tesseract. Did they rebuild the Tesseract around it if they were able to actually crack it open? We don't see that. And we don't see anybody trying to put the Tesseract back where it was. And even if they did put the Tesseract back where it was in the little lab, the SHIELD lab in the 1970s, Loki still manages to get it anyway, because putting it back means that the events from that timeline lead right into the events of Avengers 2012. And the disruption that occurs in Endgame is Loki manages to get his hands on the Space Stone and disappear and not get returned to Asgard the way he did in Thor the Dark World. So that disrupted the timeline as well. And this isn't even mentioning the fact that bad Nebula manages to take the place of good Nebula when they return to the present, which is around the year 2023, and manages to use the time travel, the quantum realm equipment, to bring Thanos and his minions and his army from 2014 all the way to the present, so he can get the stones there. Now, if Thanos comes forward in time to our present, in the case of this movie, it's, you know, well past the current year. Sorry. Excuse me. Then he isn't around to acquire the stones and snap his fingers in the first place, which means that none of the events of the Infinity War actually took place. Wouldn't this create a problem for the timeline, even if they went back and put all the stones back where they were? I mean, you know, let's face it. Spoiler alert, Thanos is gone. All of his minions are gone. You know, Tony managed to get all the stones at the very end of the big battle at the end, snap his fingers and wipe them all out. Well, they got rid of Thanos, great. But the problem is, of course, is that now the timeline is different, and that creates an incredible paradox. And the movie doesn't do anything to address this at all. They talk about how time sort of fits together, you know, sort of naturally, or it creates split timelines. But I always thought that the whole point of time travel is to have a positive effect on your present. You know, if you go back and you change something, then it'll affect the present. Now, of course, they wanted to go back and not change something. They wanted to take each of the stones from the past, but then return them to the same point in the past, so it was like they were never missed. But that plan went up in smoke when Thanos found out about their plan in the first place, and then came forward with Nebula's help to the present to bomb the hell out of the Avengers facility in New York. Because Thanos never took the opportunity to go get all those stones and snap his fingers in Wakanda in the first place and wipe everybody out. So it's a problem. Doesn't make sense. No, the plot of the movie doesn't make sense anymore, because though they didn't want to do damage to the timeline, they did a heck of a lot of damage by allowing Thanos to come forward. They didn't, you know, let him do that. He came forward, but still, it's not like they can return him back to 2014 and wipe his memory, so he would do the exact same thing all over again. You understand what I'm saying? Anyway, If that kind of thing concerns you, as it does me, then it would probably interfere with your enjoyment of the film. If it doesn't concern you, if you're just happy to see all the the vanished guys come back in the end and fight everybody all at once in a spectacular battle scene, and then see Thanos finally get what's coming to him, then you probably enjoyed the movie a heck of a lot more than I did. I enjoyed the movie, but these little issues, kind of bum me out a little bit, because I'm like, shh, I wish they had thought more about that, They talk about time travel movies in the film itself, of course, and about how they don't make any sense. But, since time travel doesn't actually exist, nobody knows how it would actually work if it did. You'd have to test that theory. And in doing so, you'd put a whole lot of reality in danger. At least I think if you want to go back in time and experience something, it would be very, very dangerous. It's fun in fiction. It's fun to think about what could happen and to affect the future and affect your own past and everything like that. But in reality, it seems very, very dangerous, unless it's one of those stories in which your presence in the past was also always a part of the timeline, and so you haven't really changed anything. That's like the second type of time travel movies. This is not that. This is a different type. At least I think it is. It seems to be. There's some big emotional moments in Endgame, like in Infinity War, that didn't quite play the way I was hoping they would. In particular, the death of Natasha Romanoff. Anybody who thinks that Scarlett Johansson is not that good of an actress, watch this film and watch the scene where she is hearing a report on Clint. The very beginning of the movie, Clint is hanging out with his family on his farm, and then they vanish because Thanos snapped his fingers. And what we find out is, there's a skip forward of 5 years, is that he's been basically running around all over the world, finding criminals and just killing them. Just wiping them out, slashing their throats, stabbing them, shooting them, whatever. Because he feels that they deserve to be, exterminated by Thanos, and they weren't, so he's going to take care of it himself. Natasha, of course, and Clint have a very, very close relationship. He was pretty much her first friend, it seems like. She talks about how she was basically his target. S.H.I.E.L.D. ordered him to go and kill her, but he decided against that and instead recruited her so that she could work for S.H.I.E.L.D. And it's funny, there's a really interesting video about Natasha that I saw on YouTube a few weeks ago about how in the beginning, when we first are introduced to her in Iron Man 2, she wasn't really playing a character. She was just someone who was really good at fighting and very sneaky and had a lot of skills. And over the course of the series of movies, she develops friendships, not only with Clint, but with Cap and with some of the other people on the team. And so, in the end, she's the one who basically has to, she chooses to sacrifice herself so that they can get the Soul Stone. But I felt like the scene could have played a little bit differently, emphasizing how important that Clint was, because she's doing this with Clint. It's a choice that one of them has to make, to sacrifice himself for the other. And I always felt it would have been a better idea for her to sort of emphasize what was important to her, which was Clint getting his family back. Because Clint doesn't have anybody back. If his wife was still left after the snap, he'd be home. If just one of his kids was still left after the snap, he wouldn't have gone anywhere. He would have stayed home with them. But they all left, and so he didn't have anything anymore. And Nat definitely wants Clint to get his family back. So making that more explicit in their last scene together would have been nice. It's okay. It doesn't play quite as well as I'd hoped it was. And again, the really sort of emotional, seriously emotional music that comes up, in much the same way with Gamora's death scene in Infinity War, seemed a little bit too much at the time. Same with Loki's death scene in the beginning of Infinity War. I felt like the music was really sort of trying to goose the tragedy of it more than it needed to. Having minimal music or no music at all, I think would have been more effective. Now, the exception to this is when Wanda in Infinity War has to kill Vision in order to stop Thanos from getting the Mind Stone. There's a big musical cue in that, but it works in that scene. And I don't know why that is. It just works for me in ways that the other one doesn't. That's a really, really great scene. And then, of course, in Infinity War, Once she finally destroys the Mind Stone, then all Thanos has to do is hit that time stone and undo it, and you're just like, ah, no. It's really great about that end scene in Infinity War is because, the hero won, but then they lost, but then they won, but then they lost, and it just goes back and forth like that over and over again until finally Thor comes along and puts an axe in Thanos' chest, and you go, yeah, they won, and then snap, oh no, they didn't win. That's why I like Infinity War more than Endgame, really, is because stuff like that happens. That really are just great dramatic reversals, one after the other. And Endgame, you've got a good one right here. You've got Thor and Cap and Steve and Tony all trying to fight Thanos at once. and doing really well for a while, and there's a couple of really great moments in that, especially one involving Cap, and you know which one I'm talking about. Pink, right? That one's really great. But Thanos still proves to be too much for him, and it's at that moment finally when Steve's like, okay, I've got a bone sticking out of my arm, but I'm going to strap on my half shield and go back into the fight once more, and then we hear Cap on your left, and then the portals that Doctor Strange open up, and all the other heroes that suddenly are back pour out of them and go out to face Thanos' army. It was a pretty incredible moment. It makes me curious, though, about what actually happened after the snap. Because Doctor Strange, of course, is the one who says, I've watched 14 million versions of this conflict, and only one of them we win. So when he reappears, does he reappear on Titan with the other Guardians and with Spider-Man and said, okay, good, they did it, we're back. Now we need to open some portals and we need to gather everybody. So he gets everybody off Titan to Earth, and then he goes to Wakanda and says, hi, T'Challa, very honored to meet you, I'm Doctor Strange. There's a big fight going down in New York with Thanos fighting the Avengers, we need to go there right now. And then he goes to San Francisco, where Hank Pym and Hope have just reappeared, and he's like, hi guys, listen, big fight in New York happening right now, step through this portal please, okay, we need you to fight. And then he goes and finds the Ravagers and from Guardians of the Galaxy and gets them to take all their ships through the portals, just one after the other. So that's why it maybe takes a little bit of time for them to all appear all at once. But when it does, it's pretty glorious. It's pretty glorious indeed. And before I forget, the big moment from Endgame, that's my favorite moment, and probably one of my favorite moments in the entire series of movies, is when they replay the elevator incident from The Winter Soldier. I'm thinking like, Cap plus elevator equals awesomeness. He steps on that elevator, I'm just like, just say it. Does anybody want to get out? But he doesn't. Instead, he takes his knowledge that they're all Hydra and pretends to be Hydra too and just walks right out with that case. I'm like, that was so sweet. I love that part. I just loved it. And then, of course, there's a fight scene where he fights himself, which wasn't as exciting, but it's still pretty brutal because they tumble down all those stairs and smash through that glass. Anyway, lots to like about the movie. And in the end, you've got potentially a new team of Avengers. Most of the other guys are going off to do their own thing. Thor's going to hang out with the Guardians. He'll probably end up palling around with them in Guardians Volume 3. And Hulk, slash Banner, sort of a mixture of the two. He's going to be at the Avengers compound in New York, probably, helping out with whatever missions for the new set of Avengers. But you've got Doctor Strange, Spider-Man, Carol Danvers, and occasionally T'Challa might make a guest appearance. Some of the other guys, Hope and Ant-Man, they'll be there. And that's the future of the movies right there. We've got a Black Widow solo movie, which is obviously going to be, one big flashback, one big prequel about Natasha, either her origin or maybe some other mission that took some place during the whole series of movies, but, one we hadn't really heard about until now. Yeah, aside from that, we've got a few sequels that were announced before Endgame actually came out, so it's not like the disappeared guys were, there was any doubt about them returning. But they've also announced the Celestials movie. Is it Celestials? No, sorry, Eternals. Eternals are different from Celestials. Ego, played by Kurt Russell in Guardians Volume 2, he is a Celestial. Eternals are not quite as powerful as them. But I have no idea who any of those characters are. I'm not familiar with any of them, so I'm going to get to discover them, along with everybody else who sees the movies and doesn't read the comic books. I like to read about the characters, but I haven't gone back and read all those things. I waited until after seeing Infinity War last year to read both Infinity Gauntlet and Infinity War, so I know a little bit more about them. I know about the Living Tribunal. They mention him in Doctor Strange. I had no idea what they're talking about. When I rewatched Doctor Strange, I'm like, the Living Tribunal. I know what that is now. I know who that guy is. He's a big godlike character with like 3 faces on his head. Anyway, I am going to watch a few movies by some of these directors of these films that aren't part of the MCU that I haven't seen before. Kate Shortland is the director of the Black Widow solo movie. She did a movie called The Berlin Syndrome, I think, which I haven't seen and I want to see it. And there's a few others like that as well. I'll be rewatching some I've already seen. There'll be a few that I've never seen before that I'm going to check out for the first time. So that'll be like a little kind of sort of series that I'll be doing. But this brings my Motion Conflict Underoos series to a close, and I can't believe that I'm still recording it. The battery has lasted in my camera this long. Thank you very much for watching, guys. If you'd like to see Luke's or Jim's MCU movies, the link's that below. The link to my playlist is below. The link to my Facebook page is below. Thank you very much for watching. Appreciate you taking the time, and I'll see you again sometime soon. Assemble.